Great. Thank you, listeners, once again to the Trainer podcast. And today I have a conversation bridging the gap between science and practice again for you in the military, police, and emergency medicine. And I have a conversation with Adam Nicholls, a professor of psychology. Is that right?
Yeah, professor of psychology, yeah, at the University of Hull in the
Yes.
UK.
Yeah. And you write some great practical stuff on LinkedIn that was triggered me, and then I bought your book, Psychology for Sport Coaching. It is also it has many editions already. It was the third.
Yeah, we're on to the third edition now.
Yeah, and it's great. And I also read some of your papers. It seems you are involved in different subjects, like the whistleblowers. And also, I saw some research on depression and mental health in elite sports. I also came across stress appraisal articles.
So
So
quite a collected range of research. More recently, I've been researching anti-doping education, and part of that is whistleblowing. But I've done research on the past in, I suppose, mainly my research focus was stress and coping,
stress and
how
coping.
how we as psychologists can help individuals deal more effectively with stress via coping, which is then spun off into mental health, mental toughness, emotions. Quite a broad range of topics, really.
Yeah, great. Well, that's also the topic I want to talk about. And let's not forget, you are also practicing Brazilian Jiu Jutsu.
Yeah.
Like me, and also like Dan Dworkis, who wrote a great book also, but also BGG. And today it seems everybody is rolling around the mat. So it would be great because for me, BGG is like what Andrew Huberman calls online real-time coping.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so that would be great also.
Oh yeah, I've been training in Brazilian Jiu Jutsu now for 6 years. So I've been a purple belt for a while now. Done a few competitions. It's just, I think it's one of the most one of the most amazing sports that I've done in terms of a stress management technique, because you can't be thinking about anything else that's going on whilst you're rolling and training. It's just the friendships that you build. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's great. And there is a great tradition also. If I go back to Hickson Gracie, who was the first teacher here, he talks also a lot about the psychology of fighting and training, and there's incredible knowledge. I hope we touch upon it. But first, I want to ask you about mental skills. Because sometimes for me, the definition of concepts is important because from there you move on, and sometimes it needs a little bit clear. But for me, for example, mental skills, these under the umbrella of mental skills, sometimes people talk about breathing. But breathing, is the mental skill, and we have also tactics are also mental skills. But what do we mean by mental skills, and why are they different from other skills? What is your?
Yeah, so for me, mental skills are tools for the mind, and purpose of them is to allow us, or to help us deal with pressure and allow us to perform under pressure. That's why we have mental skills. It's about building, as I see it anyway, building capacity. And they're called mental is because there's no physical movement necessarily attached to them. And it's about helping us develop the mindset. Again, going back to, as a sports psychologist, about allowing people to perform under pressure, not be as kind of affected by stress. That's how I would see a mental skill.
So and mental skills, it's also in the word. These are skills, so I can imagine you can learn them.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in that mental skills are something that can be learned. However, I guess in all things psychology, there's always like a caveat. And so, for example, one of the mental skills I use quite a lot with athletes is mental imagery. However, the effectiveness of mental imagery is dependent upon your ability to engage in imagery. And so you and me are probably likely to have very different abilities in mental imagery, or we may do. However, with time and practice, we can enhance our ability to engage in these mental skills. It's things such as like a mental skill such as thought stopping, so blocking out negative thoughts. You know, people will have probably different abilities to do that, but with time and practice, people can always improve their levels of the skills.
Yes, okay, you can always improve, but there are, because you can also argue that, for example, some people have traits like personality traits so that they can handle stress more. For example, if I take the big five and I go to neuroticism, I don't know how you call it, neuroticism.
Yeah, neuroticism. Yeah.
Neuroticism. It would be plausible to suspect that if you're high on that, maybe emotional stability is more of a problem than if not. So what I'm trying to find out is how much is skill and can be learned, and how much is personality. I'm not sure if there is any research.
Yeah, so there's definitely a skill component, but we looked at a study examining the relationship between coping and personality, and I definitely see coping as there are some physical elements, but generally it's a mental skill, a psychological skill which can be taught. And we found that those who are the more extroverts, those who score high on agreeableness and openness, use much more task-oriented coping. By that we mean mental imagery, logically analysing situations, relaxation, making sure they put in the most effort, so managing their effort expenditure, and also controlling negative thoughts. Whereas those who scored highly on neuroticism were much more likely to engage in distraction. So, for example, if you're engaging in a stressful situation, thinking about a task irrelevant thought. So, what am I watching on TV tonight? What am I cooking tonight? Things that are not really helpful or conducive to performance, but that'd be how they would cope. So yeah, so personality to a certain extent does influence the certain maybe coping skills and mental skills that people use.
And what are the implications for training and selection? If, for example, here in Holland in the police, there are some personality tests, also in the military. And well, this is a very wide question, of course. I don't expect the single answer, but should we take it into account, these personality traits, before we are trying to develop mental skills, or do we say everybody can improve anyway?
I think if you're asking people who are going to be in stressful situations to teach them mental skills, they're all going to need these mental skills, so they should all be taught them. But in terms of screening, it's interesting that if I believe that if you're neurotic, or if you look at this personality trait called the dark triads, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, neuroticism, you're going to know what you're being screened for, and you're going to think, I might lie on this questionnaire. So I'm not always sure screening is the right way forward. However, what I think is probably a more effective way of screening is actually putting people into stressful situations and then monitoring their performance. Really, it's probably a more accurate way. But no, I think all people should be taught mental skills, and what we can do is monitor their changes in stress, or their ability to use these different psychological skills. So, for example, with mental imagery, there's a questionnaire which measures an individual's ability. So you could test them before the intervention, and then after periods of time of using mental imagery to see if they've had an improvement. So yeah, there are ways around it. But yeah, I've always find that quite interesting when companies use psychological profiling tools.
Yeah.
You can lie, can't you?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on this, so of course you can lie, but I'm not sure if you can outlie, for example, the big five. I honestly don't know.
No, you can't. No, you can't lie, but you might. So, for example, if you're looking at conscientiousness, there might be questions about, you know, about that.
Yeah.
If you're doing this for a job, you might think, oh, I should make it look that I care about what I do, and that kind of thing. So you may, you know, slightly inflate your answers in some areas and decrease them in others.
So the conclusion for this is that mental skills can be improved.
Yes.
And yeah, okay, that.
And I think that improvement will vary from person to person. The level of improvement, the baseline measures of improvement. But I think everybody with time and practice, regular practice, can improve their mental skills, definitely.
Well, and moving into another topic, that is mental toughness, because I saw a chapter in your book about mental toughness. And for example, when I was a young boy, I trained in Kyokushinkai karate. It was a full contact karate style from Japan, and they called themselves the strongest karate, and so on and so on. And it was a strong karate, and it was all about mental toughness. And you either survived or you didn't, and it was a sort kind of survival of the fittest, also mentally. And it was all about, the Japanese called it kokoro, like the burning heart, the fighting spirit. It's all about mental toughness, and also in police training, military training, mental toughness. It was for the most part also like a boot camp like training, where you had to perform, even if you're tired performing, if you have pain, you know, like to talk about your weaknesses and so on. And recently, Steve Magnus wrote a book about Do Hard Things, and he criticized an old image of mental toughness. And it was a great book, and a lot of people read it. And for me as a psychologist, I came into contact with acceptance commitment training later on in my life, and it was also a different approach. I'm not sure, because we didn't talk about the construct of mental toughness, but I will hear it from you. But the word mental toughness triggers in me a kind of like, you know, the image of being tough, and I'm not sure if this is.
Yeah, it's interesting that. So I wrote a book a few years ago with an ex-England Rugby Union international, and we got a chap to write the foreword who was a former England Rugby Union coach, played for England, coached England. And one thing he talks about mental toughness, he thinks it's vastly understood. He thinks that the archetypal image of a mental tough is someone who's very, very tough physically, but actually he said that's wrong. And he said there's lots of times you'll see somebody like that who goes off script because they can't control their anger, they can't control their emotions, and actually it costs the team. So he said that's wrong. And I agree with it. Mental toughness is about, for me, it's about being able to handle and perform under pressure, and not letting your performance deteriorate under pressurized situations, because you can cope with that pressure. So yeah, so I don't think mental toughness has a look. I don't think you can. Yeah, and it shouldn't be confused with like physical toughness. I don't think they're the same thing at all.
No, and the construct you talk about, mental toughness, can you explain a little bit more? What is it? What kind of construct is it, and how is it, for example, measured today?
So yeah, in terms of defining mental toughness within the literature, it's quite, among, you know, sports psychologists, scientists, it's quite it has been a contentious issue about what is it really. You know, they're all different approaches. So there's Clough's 4 C's: challenge, commitment, control, confidence. But essentially, how I see mental toughness, if you look at all the different conceptualizations, all the different definitions, ultimately it refers to being able to maintain a standard of performance, whatever that is, in sport, military, whatever it is, exams, interviews, under pressurized situations. Being able to withstand that pressure, and not, I guess, not kind of crumbling under pressure, not succumbing to the pressure. That's how I see mental toughness. And How it's measured, there are different ways. So it can be, there's questionnaires, but again, as we spoke about already, they can be vulnerable to self-inflation, or actually, if you're not aware of, you might think, or I might think, oh, I'm really mentally tough. So when I complete a mental toughness questionnaire about being able to handle pressure, being confident, etc., I might overrate my scores. And there is actually a tendency, believe it or not, for males to overinflate their abilities. So if you look at other domains in sort of mathematics, males are much more likely to see that they're better than what they really are. So it's probably similar for things like mental toughness, actually. And that's why it makes you wonder, are these self-report questionnaires the most accurate way of measuring mental toughness? It's difficult, isn't it? It's a difficult construct to measure, like many of the psychological constructs.
And how do you develop mental toughness? Do you have any?
Yeah, I think there are different ways of developing mental toughness, but from my perspective, I think there are two central elements. I think it's about giving people opportunities under some form of pressure, under some form of stress, to perform skills, but at the same time teaching them psychological skills to help them prepare and manage the stress that they encounter. So, for example, there's been some studies in sport of cricket where they will try and develop some stressful situations, maybe give them punishments if they don't, not severe punishments, but you know, extra training, extra running if they don't perform to a specific standard. But then equally teaching them how to cope, so deep breathing, logical analysis, imagery. So it's like a two-pronged approach, rather than just saying, right, this is a really tough challenge, you have, you know, do this, without actually giving them any input into how they could manage that. I think that's really important. I think coaches or leaders considering how they behave is another important factor as well. So, you know, supporting athletes, encouraging them to develop, working on their confidence, working on, you know, providing stress management techniques. All these factors, I think, teaching coping strategies. I think also viewing the way, or training people to view stress differently. So viewing it as a challenge rather than a threat. So, for example, I ask you to do a particular task, whatever that may be. What I'd want you to do is go in there thinking about what you want to happen, how you will make that happen. And this generates what's known as this challenge state. And we know that that has physiological implications. It dilates our blood vessels, which mean more blood goes to the muscles, which is what we need for conducive performance, as opposed to a threat state where you're focusing on what can go wrong, what, you know, negative outcomes. So we want these challenge states. We want people to be able to perform under pressure, get used to performing under pressure in a potentially safe environment, so that when they then have to, you know, go off into, you know, whatever environment it may be, that they've got some experience of learning and developing under pressurized situations. That's how I kind of see it.
And on the topic of stress and threat and challenge, I also spoke with Dr. Bilderwinski from Science is kind of on the topic also, because of the bad name stress has, of course, and then overlooking this. And in this paper, I found this paper. I think it's called Stress Appraisals Influence Athletic Performance and Psychophysiological Response During Cycling Time. I think it was from you and your colleagues.
Yes.
Yes, because I got a preprint, so I couldn't see the authors.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
But this is a little bit for the scientists under us, so maybe not directly applicable to the field. But you mentioned that the biopsychosocial model, I think, differs from the CMR theory in its conceptuation of appraisals. And I wondered when I was reading that, are there different thoughts about the appraisals in these theories? About
well, yeah. So the two different. So we use generally Richard Lazarus he's a stress emotion theorist, his theory of appraisal, which focuses more on the emotional side and just the actual what a challenge appraisal is and what a threat appraisal is. Whereas the biopsychosocial model actually incorporates that, but it also focuses on the physiological responses to stress and how that differs for challenge and threat appraisals. They're a unique cardiac responses. So blood pressure, for example, will be higher for a threat than it would be for a challenge.
Yeah. So we can conclude if for practice that if you are in a challenge appraisal,
in a challenge situation, you'll have a more efficient cardiac activity in a sense that the blood vessels dilate, more blood goes to the muscles, which is where it's needed for performance, perform at your best. But then also from a psychological perspective, you're more likely to experience more pleasant emotions in the challenge state, whereas much more likely to experience anxiety. And when you get anxious, your body can kind of not shut down, but it's not optimal for performance, essentially. So what as leaders, we want to be generating challenge appraisals within stressful or demanding events, we'll call it.
And what do we have to do as coaches, psychologists, trainers to instill that kind of appraisal in our trainees and students?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing is it's about encouraging the statement of what do you want to happen when you go in that challenging situation? How are you going to make it happen? That's all well and good, but that does work. But then there will be a tendency for some people to dwell back on the threat. Oh, well, what happens if this happens? Or I might miss that. Well, actually, then it's about understanding your feeling, and that's normal. And I think it's natural to experience these threat states, this anxiety, but it's not dangerous for you to feel that. It's just natural. Now focus on stopping those negative thoughts. How do you refocus on this challenge? So I think it's about being aware of that, and going back to my own experience as a Brazilian Jiu Jutsu practitioner, it's something I try and generate when I competing. So I could be thinking about, I'm going to get tapped out in the first 30 seconds, or I might break my arm, or I might pass out if I get choked out. But I don't want to be thinking about those things. I need to be focusing on my game plan, how I'm going to react to the opponent, what I want the opponent to do, what traps I'm going to set, how I'm going to, I need to be focusing on those elements of the challenge rather than the threat of what could go wrong. Because it's not easy to do. It's probably harder for some people than others, but ultimately that's the goal, that's the aim, to maintain, to get this positive and a mindset to enhance performance, I think.
And then we are exactly on the point of intervention, isn't it? Because you want to focus on your game plan and not on the threats. Well, that's easily said, as you also said, but how do you do that? I mean, what do you have to learn?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things you need to learn. So first of all, again, going back to this mental toughness, you need to be able to practice this in situations that are, quite stressful, but not very stressful. So increase the stress levels over time. So that might be a better opponent, more people watching, getting used to practicing under challenge. But then I think equally also, you've got to have a game plan that you want to stick to. You've got to have a plan. You need to know how to generate, you need to know, I guess, the difference between a challenge and a threat appraisal, make the athlete or the individual aware of the key differences. And then, because I think sometimes people are unaware of how they react to stressful situations. So just, I think, increasing that awareness, I think that's really important. Teaching them coping strategies, also about enhancing their self-efficacy, their belief in their ability to be successful as a coach. It's about instilling that in people, that they can, and then so that they have in their mind their ability to meet the challenge. That's the key. They have if we perceive that we have the ability to meet the demands of the situation, then we're more likely to experience a challenge state. Where if you or I are going into a stressful situation, or a first responder thinking, oh, I don't know if I've got the ability here to deal with this situation. I don't know if my skills, whatever they are competent or good enough, high enough. That's when they can experience threat.
Yeah. So it is a lot about real preparation in all those domains. And by that building your, well, there are a lot of things you build, of course, but you're building your self-efficacy. And on that topic, you talk about self-efficacy, yeah, and there is also literature about self-confidence. And recently, a year ago, I was kind of shocked by reading a meta-analysis about self-confidence and sports, if I correct. And I had contact with the author, and there was such a thin line between confidence and performance. While I've always been under the impression that if you're confident, that has a huge positive impact on your performance. But in there, it's only just one meta-analysis, of course, eh? So it's not the end and all. But they mention in the article, well, that they also wanted to research self-efficacy, so that it's different between self-confidence and self-efficacy. But what's your take on it? Is there research which shows that self-confidence or self-efficacy really helps us to perform better on a stress?
I think I know the meta-analysis you're referring to. There was a link, wasn't there? But the effect size wasn't high, so there was a small link. Yeah, and it could be a variety of reasons. From a research perspective, it could be the different questionnaires used. But from a psychological perspective, from an applied perspective, I do think confidence is important. I think people need to be confident when they're asked to perform under stressful situations, and I think that comes from the coaches, but also their preparation in terms of their physical and mental preparation. I think if you're being asked to perform in any demanding environment, if you're not prepared, or say for example, preparation could be even sleep the night before, it could be physical fitness. If you don't believe in your preparation, then it can lead to doubts, and doubts I don't think are good for optimal performance under pressure. And that's why I think sometimes confidence is good, because it can alleviate those doubts, those negative thoughts.
And do you make a difference between self-confidence or confidence and self-efficacy? Because from what I understood is self-efficacy is a little bit more specific to a task.
Yeah. So when I talk about confidence, I suppose I focus on sport confidence, which is sort of confidence in someone's ability within sport to perform successfully. But then you look at self-efficacy. You can have like generalized self-efficacy, but then you can also have self-efficacy for specific situations. So just because someone is kind of confident or highly self-efficacious in their ability to play sport, for example, say football, they might not be a strong efficacy in their ability to engage in public speaking.
Yeah,
they're very different skills. And I think it's important that we distinguish between those, and understand that it does vary from situation to situation to a certain extent, I think.
Yeah. Well, it would be great, of course, if you can generalize self-confidence across domains, because I think if I look, for example, in the military or special units, they do a lot of stuff like going into how do you call it? Heights. What is it? Height? Jumping out of planes, going underwater, doing boxing, do all kind of stuff. Not only because they have to use it in their occupation, but I think the idea is that you get used to a lot of challenging situations, and maybe it generalizes. I'm not sure if it is, but
yeah, I think, and also some people might be saying more confident at boxing than they are at jumping out of a helicopter. But by doing all of those things, you're actually putting people in, for some, stressful situations, and then it's kind of requiring them to kind of deploy and learn different resources. Because say, for example, say if you love jumping out of helicopters or airplanes, parachuting, actually for you, that's really exciting and real fun.
Yeah.
And you don't really need to deploy any coping strategies, because it's just you love it.
Yeah.
Whereas you might not like going in cold water, or you might
Yeah.
not like boxing, or you might not like some of the other things. But actually, by doing all those things, I think it leads to variety. It allows people to gain confidence from overcoming difficult situations,
Yeah.
and also practicing being involved in those difficult situations. So you actually, you're going to be practicing mental skills, you're going to be using mental skills, so that when you come up against other challenging and very hostile situations, you've kind of got a bank to fall back on of what you've done in the past, and then you can engage in that behavior and mindset.
Yeah, because for me as a trainer, that kind of transfer is important because, for example, in police work, you come across novel situations you have not prepared for, and it would be great if we could teach some, like generalized underlying whatever it is. There is research, of course, from Dr. Crum from Stanford about stress mindset. So a general mindset about I'm going to handle this situation, even if it's novel.
Yeah, I think one thing that I kind of do when working with athletes, or when working with elite athletes, is trying to prepare them for different situations.
Yeah.
Of course, there's going to be some novelty there, but still, if you look at some of the worst case scenarios of what could happen, but then equally having a preparation of how you will deal with that, and knowing that you can deal with that, and that
Yes.
take confidence from your preparation of what you've done in terms of so just yeah, I think I remember once I was working with a young athlete who was just broke into the first team, and he didn't like crowd reactions, and so we worked on the different crowd reactions, whether that's cheering, booing, etc., etc., and actually becoming comfortable with that and accepting that, and then kind of blocking it out and focusing on his own plan and what he wanted to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.